Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of our 381 registered participants, from Kabul to Moscow to Los Angeles. My name is Terhi Mölsä, and on behalf of the Fulbright Finland Foundation, it is my privilege to wish you welcome to the fourth webinar in our Internationalization of Higher Education in the COVID-19 Era series. Today's topic is Reimagining Comprehensive Internationalization. Juho Kusti Paasikivi, a former Finnish president, used to say, "Kaiken viisauden alku on tosiasioiden tunnustaminen." The beginning of all wisdom is the recognition of facts. Sage advice in general, and it also guides our task today to take an honest look at the situation. From a very candid perspective, what is really happening with comprehensive internationalization? How has COVID shifted that? And how are institutions pivoting in this moment? And what strategies are they undertaking in internationalization in the midst of competing priorities? What are the facts? And what do the facts mean in terms of prognosis? And ultimately, what's the wisdom? Based on facts, what can and should we do right now and for the future? I want to thank our speakers, K Hutzik and Meredith Mcquade, who boldly addressed this challenge. We are absolutely thrilled to have you with us. And I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that will follow. We received a lot of questions from you as you registered for this webinar. And our foundation's own resident internationalization scholar practitioner, Lisa Weimer, who will be moderating the Q&A, is making sure to include them. From the Fulbright Finland Foundation's perspective, it is so important for our partner institutions to be able to put internationalization as a core of their mission. I want to thank our partners in this webinar series, the Association of International Education Administrators, and the USA Study Abroad Office of the US State Department that also funds the series. We are delighted to be working with you. And now I have the pleasure to turn it over to the Chief of USA Study Abroad, Heidi Manley.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Terhi, and many thanks to you and your team for being such a terrific partner along with AIEA and for joining us on this collaborative adventure as we convene U.S. higher education experts around important topics to the internationalization of higher education in the COVID-19 era. And many thanks to all of you for joining us here today. I am so pleased to be here with you all on behalf of my USA Study Abroad team at the U.S. Department of State to open this important conversation. And I want to give a quick shout out to Amelia Vanderlaan, my team member, who has been instrumental in developing this series and will be facilitating the question and answer session today, ably assisted by one of our fantastic virtual interns, Sheridan Waterfall from Rutgers University, Camden. I was determined to try to not use words such as unprecedented or phrases like the new normal in my remarks, but these types of words and phrases are hard to avoid as they cut to the heart of the global situation we are all in. A word I would use is absence. As with so many things, the importance of something may only be felt when it is no longer operating the way it should. In this case, when students are no longer traveling to and from our countries in such record numbers, I personally believe and hope there is a greater realization of the value of international education, especially in facing a global challenge like this one. American student mobility is an essential component of our commitment to the importance of people-to-people connections between the United States and other countries, as is welcoming qualified international students to study in the United States. From my view, there are so many of us at the State Department and in your own institutions who are working tirelessly to support an even stronger return to student mobility, not only in the number of American students studying abroad, but to see more American students studying abroad who truly reflect the diversity of our country. Access and equity matter. Conversations such as the ones we will have today remind us that true campus internationalization can be more than the movement of people across borders, And I'm looking forward to learning from our experts here today, as well as from all of you. I have been inspired, amazed, and humbled by the creativity and innovation we have witnessed in the response from higher education institutions around the world to this pandemic. And I am continually reminded that it is often challenging circumstances that bring communities together and remind us of the importance of what we do in new ways. I am thrilled that two U.S. higher education leaders and innovators are here with us today, and I'm grateful to Meredith Mcquade and John Hudzik for sharing their expertise with us. And again, thank you all for being here and sharing your thoughts and expertise as well. We have so much to learn together. Over to you, Lisa, to begin today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for the warm welcome and introductions, Heidi and Terhi. My name is Lisa Weimer, and I am the Assistant Director for Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives at Fulbright Finland Foundation. And I want to wish all of you a big hello, or as we would say in Finland, moikka, to our friends and colleagues joining us from around the globe. So let's jump right in by introducing our esteemed panel of speakers. Today we have two thought leaders in the field. First, let me begin with John K Hutzik. John is well known in our field. He is a professor at Michigan State University and NAFSA Senior Scholar Emeritus for Internationalization. He's also a past president of AIEA and so much more. We were interested to learn that John was also a Fulbrighter. He was a senior scholar in Australia earlier in his career. So John has written extensively on the concept of comprehensive internationalization. And we are honored to have him with us today to paint a picture of what the current landscape and what we can do to shape the future. Our second speaker in this dynamic duo is Meredith Mcquade. She is Associate Vice President and Dean of International Programs for the University of Minnesota System. She's also an AIEA board member. So before entering academia, Meredith practiced immigration and civil litigation law. And we were interested to learn that before pursuing law, she took a trip around the world on a motorcycle. We are delighted that Meredith has joined us. Today, she will share some of the inspiring practices from her institutions in Minnesota. The agenda for today's webinar begins with both John and Meredith giving short presentations. And then a moderated discussion follows. We will use questions submitted in the Q&A function, which allows you to view other questions and vote and comment on them. So please feel free to add your questions during the presentations. You can find this function at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A. And we will use a few of the more popular questions, and you can vote by putting your thumbs up. There's a little icon that you can press for your thumbs up. So remember to vote on those that resonate with you. After the Q&A discussion, we will wrap up the webinar with one final question to the speakers. So before we get started, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website after the event. Participants can interact and connect with one another through the chat function, which I already see is happening, which is great. And we also encourage you to tweet throughout the webinar using the hashtag IntelledC19. So without further ado, let's do it. Let's turn our attention to John. John, the stage is yours.
Okay. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. As context for discussion today, two things seem clear to me. First, higher education is under enormous stress, but not just from COVID, as we'll see. And second, COVID will be gone someday, but not the residue of change it's produced. And I'm going to focus on the implications of these two comments. Just two minor housekeeping points. I'll stay very close to the PowerPoint content so I don't end up wandering off into outer space. And the second is the PowerPoint will be posted on the Finland Fulbright webpage for your later use. So, a context to start things off. The US higher education system has no national system of higher education per se. The Constitution assigns education mission to the states. Federal government has influence through regulation and funding carrot. However, US higher education internationalization is shaped heavily by its position within the institution, by market forces, by national higher education associations, and regulation through accreditation bodies. The Biden administration coming, what will they do? Well, there will be a relatively quick walk back on some policies that restrict, cripple international activity, for example, anti-immigration rhetoric, visa restrictions, racist targeting. Certainly there will be a rebuilding of international relations and rejoining alliances, and some restrictions will continue for national security purposes. It's unlikely there will be any new federal programs or significant investments to enhance or expand higher education international activity given the environment that we're in. And inside and outside higher education, there will have to be a climb back to reacquire momentum for internationalization after a 2-year hiatus, or what will be, I think, 4 years of anti-everything from the White House and the loss of international student revenue from the loss of international students. We live with severe financial crisis in US higher education, potentially the worst ever. I think actually the worst ever. It will take multiple years to dig out. Now, European higher education is not as severely challenged, but significant weakening of higher education revenues is the case for many. And so there is heavy pressure on institutions growing and expanding to engage strategic reductions, cost control, and cost benefit outcome assessments. The mantra for everybody is to protect institutional core missions. Yet, international programs are not usually viewed as core. Serious problem. A new normal, sorry I use the term, is emerging and predates COVID. The global spread in education and research capacity is reshaping mobility routes and institutional partnerships for everyone. Long-term public disinvestment in higher education, especially in the US, seriously eviscerates governmental support for higher education. In the US, for example, doctoral research institutions, only 19% of their funding comes from public appropriation. And even the community colleges, only 46%. Huge tuition increases in revenue projects, such as international students seen as revenue, are the replacements. The elements of a revenue perfect storm are upon us. Revenue shortfalls are averaging 25% or more, and I would just say and more, because there will be more, an historical record. Declining or flattening domestic students enrollments adds shortfalls. There is increased competition from study abroad and other things for the best students and scholars. Brakes are being applied on tuition increases by governments and markets, and there is pressure for a less costly, flexible, outcome-based internationalization. And there is also a kind of an invasive species. Massive expansion of digital meeting and learning provide workable, if not ideal, alternatives to deal with social distancing, less money, and the things I've been talking about. But we need genuine hybridization of virtual and physical models of mobility into mutually reinforcing pedagogies. Now, even when COVID goes away, these and other core challenges to the status quo will not. There are some immediate and evolving consequences for internationalizations. Look around you. Institutions are establishing strategic planning task forces to manage cuts and reprioritize program investments. Will international have a seat at these task force tables? Also, the impact on mobility will be in numbers, models, and mobility routes. Aggregate numbers may stabilize or grow in the long run under mixed models and reconfiguring very much who goes where. Demand is there, but how to convert to sales in this new and disrupted environment is the issue. So for me, the big threat to internationalization is the following. When international activity is not integrated into core institutional missions, it is seen as something apart, as an add-on to the core, and add-ons are more easily subtracted off. So much for the bad news. Let's start moving forward to figure out what might be done about this. What is comprehensive internationalization and how might it help? Well, we'll start with the definition. CI is commitment and action to infuse and integrate, notice the word underlined, international global comparative content perspective throughout the teaching, research, service missions of higher education. Not just teaching, all three core missions. Aim to achieve benefits in core learning and research outcomes for the institution and becoming an institutional imperative, not just desirable possibility. It's a paradigm shift in scale, scope, and culture. But CI is a long-term aspiration underlined, to connect to all institutional missions, all students and majors, and all faculty and staff. But movement toward the aspiration requires manageable steps over the long run. It can't all be done at once, so don't fret over that. We see that institutional approaches over the last decade plus to CI are very idiosyncratic, shaped by their missions, values, and priorities, and so forth. There is no best model. Best model for any institution is the one that fits its missions and circumstances. However, there's always a however, isn't there? For every institution, there needs to be a commitment to common aspirations, even if doing it by different means. Mainstream, expand continuously faculty and student involvement. Integrate into core institutional missions. Expand who supports and contributes beyond the international office. If the responsibility of the international office alone, it isn't going to happen. Interconnect CI activities produce synergies. How does mobility and curricula at home and research abroad, how can they be interconnected? Not doing these things will marginalize and weaken internationalization in the institution. So this is a publication you can find on the NAFSA website. There's a small charge for it, but it really lends a lot more meat and, I guess, bone to what I have just talked about. So why engage comprehensive and strategic internationalization? I'm not kidding you. It is a lot of work, hard to do, and a journey without end. Yet, globalization is not going away. It may be morphing, but the nearly unimpeded flow of good services and ideas and challenges across borders will continue. The genie is out of the bottle. Witness COVID. Higher education internationalization builds the knowledge and skills for society to deal effectively with globalization. That ought to be enough rationale, but if you're interested in more, competition and collaboration is shifting from the local, national to a global reference frame, to global pathways of learning, talent, and ideas. The societies we serve are globally connected and shaped by world-spanning forces. And if higher education is not also globally connected, it'll fail our societies. So in the publication I just referenced, and another one coming up, there's more grist about the various rationales for internationalization, which you can look at if you need ammunition for having discussions with people. Are you waiting for back to normal? Don't wait. There is no back to normal. Take action now to meet a world changing utterly. Disruption births opportunity. It may not be pleasant, but it provides opportunity. And opportunity is not found in the status quo or in simply defending the way we do it now, but rather in changing, augmenting what we do and how. The status quo was supported by an environment that is gone, and most unlikely to return. There's also competition from inside higher education. There are countless legitimate core needs touted by diverse and powerful interests. Internationalization is not commonly viewed as a part of the institutional core at most institutions. Sorry, it isn't. A failure to integrate international activity into core higher education missions seriously weakens its future, and support for internationalization is not automatic, and support is weakened by lack of knowledge and a shared understanding about its purposes and value. There is danger in anonymity and ignorance. A shared understanding in higher education about internationalization is not commonplace, as we've discussed, and it needs to be built in understanding. There are two ways to think about doing it, one through something called strategic inclusion, and the other through, very important, establishing an institution-wide culture to support internationalization. So what needs to be done to build long-term support for post-COVID CI? One, developing an institution-wide culture of support and understanding through campus-wide dialogue. Involve and to get educated in this dialogue. Everybody, presidents, provosts, students, you name it, academic deans, chairs, faculty throughout the institution. A campus-wide dialogue to build common understanding of what is CI, why do it, how it enhances institutional missions and values, and who has roles to play. The purpose, educate, build support and buy-in, gather attention, suggest roles. I can't underestimate the importance of this one in the long term. Second, strategic inclusion of internationalization into key institutional processes, such as strategic planning, annual budget planning. Hey, if you're not at that budget planning table, you don't get money. During moments of key change, hiring a new president or deans or chairs, curricular program reviews. Think of hiring a president who cares less about internationalization. When reviewing rules, procedures, and structures, is international represented at the table in these processes? Three, build a path forward to post-COVID. Reinforce seminal goals as drivers of priorities. For example, cross-cultural learning and related outcomes. Not for moving bodies across borders as an end in itself. Interconnect international activities, produce synergies across the various elements of international programming. Build hybrid physical and virtual pedagogies. And fourth, reduce costs to institutions, students, and others. And increase flexibility for students and users in this new environment. Reprioritize what is essential to focus limited resources. Not everything done in the nature of internationalization is of equal value and payoff. Review your stable of programs. Adopt more cost-effective cross-cultural learning options. And recognize that there is no longer any optimal academic calendar. Rethink learning modules to flexibly fit individual student needs, learning objectives, and flexible time frames. Dual purposing, you can look at later in the earlier publication I mentioned, and one I'll mention in just a minute, is a cost-effective way to add resources to internationalization effort. Just one example. Adding new courses does not have to be the principal means of internationalizing the curriculum. One can add global comparative and international content to existing courses and curriculum. And build on what you're good at, existing faculty research interests as well, and existing courses and curriculum. So a couple of framing questions for partnership formation, because partnership formation will become critical in this new world. You can't afford to do it all on your own. You'll be looking for partners across your campus with other institutions. Meredith will mention some of these. And do we understand, among other things, or we have agreement with these folks? What are the desired outcomes and what is the definition of success? Do we understand the partners' operating environment constraints and opportunities? And will all partners benefit from and contribute to collaboration? So if you want more details of this stuff in my last 7 or 8 minutes, this one is also on the NAFSA website. It's free. You can download it from there. And its emphasis in much more detail is how to move from rhetoric to action in all this. And I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts. One from Winston Churchill. When going through hell, keep going. Good advice. And from Mark Twain, the secret to getting ahead is getting started. So let's get started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. So much food for thought and an important call to action for all of us, that we can't just simply sit in our home offices with our woolly socks on and wait for the status quo to return, right? We need to find our grit, or in Finnish, we call that sisu, and build this long-term support for comprehensive internationalization. So John, thank you so much for sharing that. A lot to think about. And since your presentation is so full of valuable insights and solutions, John has very graciously offered to share it with you all, and it will be available to download on our website. The link is in the chat box now. And before we move to Meredith, I would like to encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A function. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. And I see that there's 3 questions there now. You can have a look at them. You can comment on them. You can also put a thumbs up if it resonates with you. And we will select a few of those to discuss after the presentations. And so now that we have a good understanding about the context and as well as the concept of comprehensive internationalization, let's pass it over to Meredith as she shares some inspiring practices.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, John. Always nice to have you set the stage at a very high level about comprehensive internationalization. And good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone who's in attendance. It's actually really inspiring to see how many people are interested in both the theory of comprehensive internationalization and the practice. So I'm happy to be here today. I've been at the University of Minnesota in this role for a long time. I think we've been quite successful in integrating ourselves into the university. There are obviously setbacks with COVID and the loss of resources, as John pointed out. But I think one of the things I want to start out with, I rarely use the phrase comprehensive internationalization at the university. I think it's something that scares people who aren't in the field. I think it's overwhelming. And I think we get to comprehensive internationalization by being strategic and thoughtful, as John has pointed out. So could you go to the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, John set this stage for the concept of comprehensive internationalization. He's described it, he's defined it for us, and talked about why it won't be easy and presented some advice on how it can be achieved. So my role is to provide you with specific steps toward achieving comprehensive internationalization. And John described it as a long-run aspiration to engage all students and majors, all faculty and staff, and all institutional missions. And I completely agree with that. But how can we abbreviate the long run, or perhaps better said, how can we increase the odds that comprehensive internationalization is actually woven into the fabric of the institution and it's not merely a nice piece of jewelry that's put on the fabric, because as John pointed out, it's easy to take it off. So John mentioned it's important to have a seat at the table. This quote here, many people have repeated it, particularly these days, that if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu. I look for credit for that expression. I've heard it appropriated to Nancy Pelosi in Washington, D.C. In any event, whoever said it was brilliant, because it's true. It's always been true. But I think there are those of us in international fields that maybe have been at the table and maybe are thinking about the fact that we won't be, given the cuts and the pressures on higher ed. So it's important to recognize whether you've ever been at the table or never been at the table, you need to find a way to get access, if you can't get to the table yourself, to the people who are there. So how do you get there? How do you find ways to get that get those connections that will help you promote internationalization? Next slide, please. So the important thing is to become relevant. So when I was appointed to this position 14, 15 years ago, I inherited a number of just discrete units. There was no integration of the units themselves, all of them run by wonderful, talented people, but the University of Minnesota did not know who they were or what they did. And what I worked with my staff early on is this image that we were on the rim of the wheel of the university. We were, in theory, a central unit, but we were on the rim of the wheel. We were not at the hub where other central units are. And the question I posed to my staff was, how do we get from the rim to the hub? No one's going to invite us there. They're going to just assume we're going to keep doing our jobs quietly. But if you're a central unit and you believe in this, you know you need to find ways to the hub. And you don't get there by announcing it or by inserting yourself or asserting yourself without being invited. So I worked my first few years, and I encourage you again, wherever you are in this continuum, but particularly now where your role at the university may be compromised a bit, how do you get people to notice your work? Just a couple of ideas. Form or join university-wide committees. Offer to volunteer to be on a search committee. Form a committee that looks at internationalization of curriculum and invite key people. Everyone likes to share their expertise. You need to find ways to connect with people where they find value. Create awards. This is a really easy thing to do. Doesn't have to come with money. You can create awards. You give them to faculty or staff, for example, students. You promote them on the website. Create a newsletter if you don't already, once a month, even if you start out with 2 items on your newsletter. The idea is to talk about who you are and what you do and why it matters. And people will start to pay attention. The one thing I've thought of with all of this virtual connections, I'll often be at a meeting and I encourage my staff, try to find ways to make relevant comments. You don't want to be that annoying person that talks all the time, but find ways to say, hey, I'm here and I have a thought about how my work in Turkey or how our work in Mexico would support what you're talking about doing. I would discourage you from talking about comprehensive internationalization, because again, you're going to lose people. They're going to think you're asking for too much, but become important, valuable, and do your job. I often now follow up. I've encouraged my staff after meetings to follow up with an email to someone and say, I liked what you said. My staff in the Learning Abroad Center can help you with that, for example. So there are ways to do this where you move from the rim down those spokes to the hub. And then once you're in the hub, you get access to all the other spokes. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about some examples at the University of Minnesota, because where we were once on the rim and are now at the hub, we did it by picking discrete goals. You can't comprehensively internationalize overnight, and you're not going to get the support to comprehensively internationalize until people see you as capable of taking discrete bites and being successful at it. So I'm going to talk about that. We have worked really hard in the first 2 bullets there, curricular integration and career integration, in a way that the entire system now, everybody at the University of Minnesota knows what both of those are. And that promotes this idea of international connections and builds the support for comprehensive internationalization. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about community integration, which is this idea of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and international education, that intersection that a lot of people are talking about now, that I see as another path towards building awareness of international activity, but it comes with its own challenges. So I'm going to talk first about curricular integration. If you could move to the next slide. So 20 years ago, we just celebrated a 20-year anniversary of a large grant the University of Minnesota got to integrate international experiences into the curriculum. It was a very challenging goal at the time, 20 years ago, and we're still working on it. And it's still fun, it's still engaging, we're still building connections and support for this idea. Whether or not you believe your campus has good curricular integration, that is linking study abroad activity, coursework, site experiences abroad, whether or not you think you're there, you can always improve it. So 20 years ago, in order to promote this, we got a big grant, we had to prove that we could do this. We had to work college by college or faculty by faculty, for those of you in the European setting. The idea was we went to the College of Science and Engineering, which 20 years ago had virtually no study abroad because of the lockstep nature of those programs. We worked with a few faculty who thought this was interesting about how you could work it into a student's career path, a curricular path through an engineering program, and build in the opportunity to study abroad. The credits had to transfer, the financial aid had to transfer. We worked with our Office of Undergraduate Education to create scholarship opportunities. So students just enrolling were told you have a $1,000 scholarship for study abroad anytime you want to use it in your career. We did this, little group by little group goals. And all of a sudden we realized we had built this big partnership. We gave for example, the College of Science and Engineering the power to decide which majors they would start with. So you really got to do it in a way that isn't you telling people how to advance this cause. You want them to bring their own ideas in order to get real buy-in. In terms of sharing the work and the rewards, one of the things we started 20 years ago was this idea of site visits so that faculty could actually go see a study abroad site. We didn't put them up at 5-star hotels. We didn't treat them like, royalty. They experienced it the way the students did. And it changed many, many people's lives who themselves had not studied abroad when they were younger. So this idea that everyone thinks international activity is fun and easy because all the travel looks glamorous. We all know the difference. And so the idea of getting those people experiences was really part of it. And then you need a process and a timeline, if only internally, so that you can see the progress. Next slide, please. So we're well on the way to career integration now, and this was similar but different. We had to now learn about career services. We wanted to promote the idea that an international experience, even a virtual internship that we're doing now, how do you get undergraduates to talk about that experience in a interview setting, for example? What is it about surviving difficult experiences overseas translates to being a good employee? And you can see that range. We work with students, staff, alumni, employers, which was a new way of informing people what we do at the University of Minnesota. As I say, we needed to admit we didn't know much about career services. We needed to modify many of our education abroad programs to include perhaps more corporate or foundation, nonprofit type visits, so students had a cultural comparison. And again, we needed to demonstrate impact, that is positive movement for the career services offices, for the employers, for our students. So this way, again, this idea of talking about what international activity does for students, one way is through the curricular, one way is through career integration. And we've now started taking career services people on site visits as well. Well, I should say we did pre-COVID. That'll probably be somewhat delayed for a while, but this was the way to build these connections. Next slide, please. So I think this is now something, I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, actually, but I'm part of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and many of you who have been paying attention to the news, whether you're in the US or outside of the US, we are the place that George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis police. We have, it's not the news we wanted to be famous for. And of course, we're just one of many places in the world where this has gone on since time began, basically. And so we've needed to own this, but it's also the case that young people all over the world have been awoke to this idea that this racial injustice, this history of colonialism has got to be addressed. And so many people are saying, okay, well, we're in international education. We understand about cross-cultural communication. We should be involved in this. I think we should be involved in it, but I think we have to recognize that the equity and diversity and inclusion professionals have been doing this a long time. And the idea is if we're going to be partners, we have to recognize their expertise. But I would also say there's a big opportunity for those of us in international education to address this. Number one, our field. Our field is dominated by white females. Everybody knows that, particularly in the US. We need to do better about talking about it, addressing it, and changing it. We need to talk about study abroad opportunities. What do we talk with students about regarding the countries they're going to? The history, the idea of caste and class and racial injustice. International students coming here, what is our role? How do we orient international students? Or should we, must we, do we talk to international students about our own history, about how they could learn more, about how they could be involved or not? And does every student need to know this information? That is, if a student's coming from a country to study engineering and they're not interested in the social milieu, is it our job to educate them anyway? These are all really important questions. And again, they get us sitting at the table, interacting with people who may not know about our work in international education. Next slide, please. So there are lots of other ways to do what I just described. We can talk about integration of the research portfolio. The University of Minnesota, we kicked off an initiative about 4 years ago that has been so popular. It's called SPARK, Strategic Partnerships and Research Collaboratives. We just support faculty or staff doing large-scale research in multidisciplines involving more than just the US. We do it by doing the work. We look for the grants, we write the grants. I say we, it's some fabulous people I've hired to do this. And by helping other people achieve their goals, we get to educate them more about the power of internationalization. Integration of staff. We've started a certificate program at the University of Minnesota where our staff can just learn more about the internationalization of higher ed. And that way they can add something to their resume, they get a certificate. Integration into the local diaspora or immigrant communities, another way to promote your work, get more support across the local community for the work of what we do, or for the kind of work we do. Integration of individual collegiate or faculty strategic plan. If you know the College of Liberal Arts is in the process of drafting a new strategic plan, who's on that committee? Are any of them colleagues already? And how can you talk to them about getting internationalization embedded? I like to talk about the comprehensive internationalization as really an integration horizontally and vertically. And if you think about ways to do that in steps, maybe a horizontal connection that's small, a vertical connection that's big, but the idea is to look for opportunities to really promote your work. Next slide. So I was asked to talk a little bit, I'm going to run out of time here, maximizing international partnerships. So I think the current global conditions have resulted in a real focus for us on the internal partnerships that I just described. But I think there's lots of ways for us to now say, okay, what are we going to do over the next 6 to 12 months to strengthen those international ties that we have, but we haven't been able to nurture in the way that we would like. So these are just a couple of examples, especially now that everyone's used to doing virtual work. Pick a few of your key partners and pick one of the SDGs, for example. 3 months, we're going to get together. We're going to talk about what each of us is doing with respect to these SDGs. Invite faculty from one or more institutions, again, to promote your own faculty's work, to build a connection, but also to strengthen these ties in ways that aren't just about mobility. Okay, and then the last slide. So if you think again of the wheel, once you have established yourself as a team player, whether that's 2 people on your staff or 120 people on your staff, you want to prove that you can establish connections with all of these various groups. They aren't all going to be as robust. They're going to be of different strengths because you can't do everything. But again, pick the ones that you're going to win at. Try to maintain those while you also then expand to through these other spokes. It's really, I think COVID has presented us all with tremendous opportunities to rethink how we do things and to demonstrate our value at the universities, at our colleges, in ways that we haven't before. So thanks very much. I look forward to your questions.
Meredith, thank you so much. It's really good to kind of get these real practical suggestions of how to integrate internationalization throughout the core activities of the universities. So thank you for doing that. We will now move into a discussion, Q&A. And I've been watching the questions come into the Q&A box, and you're all welcome to have a look at those questions, and you can vote on them with the thumbs up. There's one in particular that I would like to start with that's getting a lot of comments as well as a lot of thumbs up. So I think this one resonates with a lot of people who are here today. So I will go ahead and read it. Oftentimes, education abroad offices are seen as service units rather than academic units, critical to the mission of a university. So how can offices practically leverage themselves to be seen as academically critical, to have a seat at the table, and to be seen as peers by faculty and administration? John, would you like to start with this one?
Yeah, I recognize that as a widespread problem. However, there's always a however. Let me start with the comment. You need to be in the right position to access the core of power. The SIOs are in the best position for doing that. Not everyone down the ladder is going to be talking to the president or the provost or the key deans. However, I think the SIOs also have a role to get their, for example, directors of study abroad or the international student offices or enrollment management and so forth, get them into conversations with key faculty. Not every faculty member has to be engaged, but key faculty and deans and chairs, so that they begin to have a face at how what I do, even if you think of me as a service unit, how what I do is key to many of the academic goals of the institution. So that's a building process. You got to get to know people. It begins with the SIO helping people to do that. But I want to add two other things. In all of this, the most important word for moving from where you are to where you want to be is persistence. Maybe just a little short of becoming a pest, but persistence in raising these issues. And I'd add this, critical. And it's in that last publication I referenced, it talks a lot about this as a way to engage people. Think in their terms and their preferences for outcomes, not what you want. What do they want? How can you present a story and real concrete ideas that will have them open their eyes and say, you mean if I do this, I might end up getting that for my teaching program or my research program? Yes, that's the objective.
And one more thing that I want to point out here is I'm reading the comments for this question, and you can even see it in the comments here in those who are attending this webinar, that there's this tension between academics and kind of these practitioners or researchers in internationalization and internationalization office. And someone says this happens across the globe. Often academics do not understand what internationality entails, and they see us as travel agents rather than as agents of change. And then another participant says, as an academic, I fully recognize the challenges of working with academics. Simultaneously, one of the major frustrations I have in working with international education professionals is the assumption that I'm the enemy. So what do we do with this tension? Because this seems to be a bit inherent to what we're talking about. And if that's the barrier, how do we get through that?
I would just add quickly, conversation, conversation, conversation. People will get to know you, and before long, people may come to the conclusion, hey, we're all in this together and we can all actually contribute something to this. Unfortunately, we sit behind, there was one comment that I read just a minute ago that said, yeah, I know all this stuff, but still, yeah, but still is going to be, but still forever, unless we really engage these conversations. And I know Meredith has done a lot of work in getting various staff line academic positions working together.
Meredith, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, you could do a whole 3-hour webinar on this one. I think just to put a little bit of a gloss on it, I think you could find almost any sort of non-academic program and you'd feel the same thing. This idea of faculty versus staff is just part of US higher ed. Some universities do it better than others, but it's always a rub because to get into the academy, to become a faculty member is a different path, and there's different sort of sense of who they are versus who the non-academics are. So when I got this job 15 years ago, I was one of the, so SIOs was sort of early on in universities saying we have to have an SIO. And the approach then, and I think still to this day, and AIEA has this conflict all the time, SIOs must be PhDs. They must be academics or nobody will take you seriously. Well, I don't have a PhD. I have a JD, but it was a practicing JD. I'm not a theoretical lawyer. I wasn't faculty at the law school when I got this job. And I was shocked. So it was a full search. I was up against people who had PhDs and were academics, and I got the job and I was thrilled. And there was pushback within the field. Many people said, I can't believe the University of Minnesota just hired somebody who didn't have a PhD. And I found it rather amusing. But I did then see, oh, I get why they said this would be hard. So here's the deal. You have to recognize the expertise the faculty have. Of course, they're good at what they do or they wouldn't be there. A couple of ideas. We have the Learning Abroad Center. So within my rather large portfolio at the University of Minnesota is the Learning Abroad Center. They have their own faculty advisory committee. So they formed the committee of people who would review curricula, approve programs, take site visits. It's actually quite competitive. They serve in 2 or 3 year stints. Number one, you get faculty on board who don't know much about you. You ask for their help and their expertise, and they get to see how really good you are at what you do. Number two, find colleges or units, disciplines within your institution that don't have success at study abroad and offer to the dean or the associate dean to be useful. Let me help you find programs that will suit your students. Let me have you meet our study abroad providers, our study abroad advisors. And we can describe for you why this is helpful. Yeah, you're still performing a staff role, but you're showing how much you know about something. Annual reports, I'm big on this. Maybe not much changed from last year to this year, but I go dean to dean every year and say, hey, look what we've done for you. Look what you've done for us. This is who's sitting on our committees. These are the awards we've given people. It really then gets them thinking, oh, okay, I guess maybe there's something going on here. So it's pretty, it's hard work, but it's super interesting. You have got to recognize that the faculty have a lot to add, but you can make their life experience, their jobs, their role as teachers better. So it's kind of it's a recruitment idea.
One thing that I've seen is also this idea of using faculty who are very engaged internationally as champions. So helping, like them kind of helping to bring in other faculty and academics into the fold. So that could also be an idea. John, did you want to add something?
No, I think we're all saying about the same thing. You've got to get out there and you've got to offer things that will be valued by the people who you want engaged. They have to be along for the ride and you have to help them see the value in doing that.
So I want to switch gears here. Well, I mean, it's all about convincing leadership again. So I guess it is in the same thematic area. But there was someone who asked, how do you convince leadership who were ambivalent about internationalization, even before COVID, that internationalization is vital, especially for community college students?
Meredith?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. And I'll tell you what, in my opinion, of course, doesn't work. And that is saying it over and over to the president of the community college, because they don't care. I mean, if they already don't get it, they're not going to get it by you saying it because it's in your interest to say it. I think you have to demonstrate that one or more of their constituencies really cares. So create an extracurricular activity and encourage students to join. Create an opportunity for faculty. We have a small team of really talented people who help faculty internationalize their curriculum, their biology curriculum, not leaving the country, but how do you internationalize a biology course so that your students are made aware of different ways of looking at a biological issue, for example? If you get some of the president's constituencies to say, this is pretty cool, and I'd like to do more of that, then the president's going to start noticing you. It's slow, no question, and you may have to create these extracurricular activities and get 2 students, but then next semester you might have 4. And promote. Put stuff on your website that draws attention so that you're able to document. You know, I've been telling you people want this, but now I can show you proof that I was right.
Just to pick up on that point, presidents, provosts are very sensitive to constituencies. And if they get a message from somebody that says, boy, you aren't doing very much for us, find out what it is that you're not doing. And by the way, offer them that you can help them in ways they maybe haven't thought about. I saw a comment when I was skipping through that, it's a paraphrase. Somebody said, my local community doesn't give whatever, 2 cents about international. They want to focus on problems and opportunities at home. Well, here's my first statement. You have businesses in your communities. They like to make money. That makes the community richer. That'll make everybody happy, I suppose. I don't know. But connection to international markets and connections to how to access those markets. How about accessing new techniques and technology from abroad and how to use it? That's going to help your communities. So this whole issue about community engagement becomes critical to selling the thing for higher leadership, because they're all very sensitive to what's going on out there.
Yeah, and actually this kind of piggybacking on what you're talking about, this community engagement. So there's this question from Esko Kopinen here in Finland. How do we sell the idea and benefits of internationalization to politicians who make decisions on a lot of the funding for the majority of the institutions in most parts of the world? They are accountable to local voters. How do we combine that local benefit with the global?
Well, I'll just start and then hand it over to Meredith, because it kind of connects with what I just said. Politicians, too, are extremely sensitive to constituents, okay? Because if they aren't, they won't be around for very long. So go out and activate some constituents to have them talk to them about how they would prefer to have more international connections, understanding, and knowledge to deal with a global economy. We are in a global economy. I'm sorry. You can argue that point. I've got a woman down the road here who believes that the world is still flat, but you've got to deal with this up front. Politicians are responsive to voters. If voters come to them and say, hey, we think this would be a good thing to do, you got your foot in the door. I'll put it that way.
Meredith, do you have any thoughts on this?
It's a really good question, whether it's Finland or the US or somewhere else, but particularly in the United States, this whole Make America Great Again, which is could be innocuous, but the way it's been used, it's not. And in my own state, we have some very parochial legislators who really don't want to hear about anything that isn't promoting the good of Minnesota. Okay, well, internationalization promotes the good of Minnesota. And I think the SDGs are a really, really important tool, you guys, because they're global and local. The SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, aren't about the rich countries fixing the problems in the poor countries. The idea is we look right here at home and say, how do we eradicate poverty? You promote that your institution is doing that, and your institution is also linking to higher ed institutions outside of the United States to do this together, to learn from each other. That's one approach. And then the other, I really agree with John, that corporations, our Carlson School of Management has a really strong advisory group made up of some of the big shots from many of our Fortune 500 companies who believe in the power of internationalization because they need it. They need it at a corporate level. And you get them to talk about the value. That really does add to the cause, add to your arguments. But it's tough. It's a tough one.
Yeah, here in Finland, we have this thing called Talent Boost. and it's a popular one with the industry. So it's nice to partner with them because they have a lot to say to politicians. So that is definitely a good way to think about this, is partnering with the industry. Well, yeah, go ahead, John.
Oh, simple. They have clout.
And they have money.
Oh, that helps too.
Well, I want to go to this question. So, as people were registering for this webinar, they submitted their questions, and there were a lot of questions, and actually we haven't gone there with where I'm going to take us. But it's this idea of one of these invasive species that you have identified, John, and that is digitalization. And this new moment that we all find ourselves in, where we have accepted and realized that we can operate in this virtual world. So I'm curious to hear from both of you, and this is going to be our final question, because we are unfortunately running out of time. But what is internationalization going to look like in the future now that we have embraced this virtual world? What is it going to look like with international mobility in, say, 5 years? Where are we going from here? What is the future of internationalization, especially given this current moment of the virtual world that we are living in? Who would like to give a shot at that one?
I'm going to let John start that. He's a good future caster.
Thanks a lot. Look, mobility looks dead right now, because right now, in a way, it is. But that will come around when we can again, as soon as we get vaccinated and do other sensible things and begin to regrow financial support for mobility. So I'm not worried about there not being mobility, because there's every excellent reason to have people get face to face in other cultures and people in other cultures to learn from one another. And okay, I'm of a prior generation. I see the value of what we're doing right now, and it has a value, but you don't get the real value if you also don't get a firsthand sense about sight and smell and everything else. So mobility is critical. However, and here's my big however, it's not going to look the same. We've already morphed tremendously in the last 15 years, say, pick whatever number you want. We used to think in terms of semester length programs, and anything else was worthless. Most people don't think that way anymore, because the marketplace has changed. Many students can't take an entire semester to study abroad. What do we give them? Something, I hope. So enter short-term study abroad programs. But also, to pick up on a theme that Meredith raised, is international internships. So a diversification of study abroad will be essential if you want to be a player in the field, whatever that means. The second thing is education abroad, at least for the US, I suppose, began in a world where there were 2 or 3 countries heavily engaged and capable of supporting it, and much of the rest of the world not. That is no longer the case. With the spread of global capacity in teaching and research and very high quality higher education systems throughout the world, we're going to have a massive change in the trade routes, if I can put it that way, between students, with students going out and students coming back in. Figuring out where that future thing, get your crystal balls out, figuring out where those trade routes are going to be, which is not inordinately hard, and responding to a changing market for education abroad in methods, how long they take place, and so forth. That's not hard to do either. The information is already out there, especially if you talk to your students. Again, I think for cost reasons, you've really got to think about how mobility integrates with other internationalization efforts, like internationalizing the on-campus curriculum. It builds support and integration for mobility. but also you have faculty. Many institutions have faculty out there in the field doing research. What role might they play in mobility, okay, in assisting with this? So these are just a few ideas, but will we have mobility in the future? Absolutely. Will it look like today's mobility? Nope.
Meredith?
Yeah, I'll be brief. John summarized it very well. I had to go out to the airport last week to renew my global entry, and I was so excited. I felt like it was my first time to the airport ever. The idea of being around people, traveling to other destinations will never, ever, ever not be exciting. I think this has been great. I'm so frankly done with virtual meetings, but I think if nothing else, we've all realized we can do it. But I certainly don't think any of us believe it's the substitute for really truly understanding people who live in different places and do things differently. And the next generation is going to be turned on to it very soon. So I'm not really that worried. We've learned the power of virtual interaction, but it can't replace being there.
Yeah. Well, we have about 9 minutes left, and I want to go to something that Meredith, you were talking about, and that is kind of the social justice piece. And I'm curious to hear from John, where does this access, equity, and inclusion, where does it enter into comprehensive internationalization? Because I think at the practical level, we heard from Meredith, how to integrate that into the internationalization efforts. But I'm curious, John, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, of course, but if you go back, if you remember how I defined comprehensive internationalization and its long-term objectives, one of the phrases was all students, all faculty, etc., all missions. So I don't, we all know that education abroad for economic and other reasons, and there are other reasons, have been the preserve of white people, folks with money, and so forth. But guess what? They won't be by any means the entirety of the future workforce. We used to screen out, all our societies, I think, used to screen out half of the talented workforce. You know how we did that? We said, women can't do anything. So we're working on that problem. But the same is true, not just in accessing a wider talent pool, by making sure that students of color and those from lower economic status have access to study abroad, education abroad, and international content. And, it's not just because it's a nice thing to do, although it is a nice thing to do. More importantly, when you diversify those who are able to confront the future, to live in it and contribute to it, you get value for society, for everyone. Diversity is a smart thing to do because it provides betterment across the board. So what do? Well, this is the issue. How do you help minority students, students from lower economic means, to be able to engage in education abroad? One of the, you provide scholarships and need-based scholarships and things like that. But the other thing you do is you recognize that one shoe size does not fit all students. So students who are first generation, whose parents may be very concerned about them going off to wherever, they need to be given extra encouragement and programs that will make, especially their parents, but them also feel some measure of safety. Many students without money will avail themselves of short-term opportunities because they can't afford anything else. Don't leave those kind of programs off the table. Think about what makes for a more diverse education abroad student population. and look at the various categories. That's not the right way to put it, but the various categories of diversity, and ask yourself, where are their constraints? What are they looking for? And how can I help them? Instead of, oh, we have study abroad here, we have 200 programs, so just go get the program you want. Probably all those programs were designed for the dominant takers of education abroad. So I could go on, but you don't want me to. So.
And Meredith, you were giving really concrete examples of how to integrate access, equity, and inclusion into your institution. And I'm just curious in this moment, because we heard from the speakers from our first webinar, how this moment where, mobility has paused, it's actually given us a pause as practitioners to really look at international education. And have you seen that at your institution? Has it been a moment of pause to really look at, okay, what have we been doing? We've been kind of on this fast train, or as John calls it, the gravy train, and now we're halted. And has it been a reflective moment to really look at these types of issues and to look at, say, equality and how to make this more accessible to all students?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll answer that immediate question first. We have really been promoting, just focusing on the education abroad opportunities. We've focused for a long time on access. We have on our website, if you're interested, we have a video on, the Black experience abroad, the Asian experience abroad. And we have students who fall into these groups who are willing to talk about their experience. And it's profound what their experience is as compared to a majority student, and just listening to it. And so we've been exploring this, finding ways to reach out and promote affordable, accessible opportunities for non-traditional students, as well as non-traditional destinations for quite a while. I think two things. This is another great opportunity for international educators to partner. Virtually every campus in the world has at least one now, if not more, people in this diversity, equity, and inclusion world. They are experts in their field. And if we go to them and say, we'd like to learn more, we'd like to partner with you, you're going to create, more people doing good work together. The mere fact that we do cross-cultural work does not make us experts in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world. And I think we need to recognize that. Our equity and diversity office has an expression, something to the effect of equity work is everybody's everyday work. I think we can start by looking right at our own staff. What are we doing to educate the team of people called international educators to make them more aware of what our society looks like and how we can change it on that level? And then there's the study abroad piece, which we've talked about. And then I think there's this issue of the international student population. What is our responsibility to educating them about what life is really like in America? Because we haven't really told them that for until very recently. I've heard we have a PhD student at the U who's doing work on the racialization of students from Africa who come to the United States who did not imagine themselves as Black, but as Kisi from Kenya, for example, and what is their experience like? And so these are just really fertile conversations, sometimes very hard, but I think it's our job to explore them and then find, maybe small steps to do our jobs better. But it's going to be a lot of work, and I think we have to be very honest about how we got to where we are without really paying much attention to that.
Yeah, really, really important work there. Go ahead, John.
I just add one thing to the question you posed. I've spent a lifetime dealing with people who, when you present a new idea, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, we can't do that. And I ask them why. And the answer is, we don't do that, which sounds a bit circular to me. Okay. So your question about, are things changing on campuses during this pause? I think it's very important to create a climate where ideas are gathered and valued initially, no matter how wacko they may sound at the start, because later on they may not be. But we need to have open discussion. And that ought to be a part of the strategic process at this point in time on campuses. I guess the second thing that I would say is that this is a huge problem we're facing. And big problems sometimes can be so immense that what we do for self-protection is dig a big hole and climb in. Well, I do see hope and opportunity in coming through this. But we can't do it if we don't engage the change mechanism. So I hope that it becomes a priority within the international education community to be really focused on, okay, what are some ideas for moving through this and through and into a world that's going to be different?
And with that, I think that that is a really good final comment, because our time has come to an end. Unfortunately, I think that we could probably continue to discuss this for another hour or two. There were some really good questions that unfortunately we were not able to get to. But a sincere thank you to both you, John and Meredith, for offering your candid perspectives and giving tangible takeaways. I really like, Meredith, you gave some very practical ideas of how to get from the rim to the hub, like joining university committees, creating committees, creating newsletters, providing awards. So these are very tangible takeaways that our audience members can take. So I think that that was really good. And before we sign off, we'd like to invite all of our webinar participants to the next webinars in our series. You can see them here. The next one is January 14th, and it's on prioritizing health, safety, and security, and that registration is open. So if you'd like to join, you can go ahead and sign up for that. We will send you all a follow-up email that includes the recording of this webinar and an invitation to the next webinars. And also, I would encourage you, as you're leaving this webinar, to fill out the quick 3-question exit survey, so we have some feedback for future webinars. And finally, on behalf of the Fulbright Finland Foundation, as well as the collaborating team at the Department of State's USA Study Abroad branch and AIEA, we thank you for joining us. Have a great day, and sending you all healthy vibes from Helsinki.
Thanks for inviting me.